All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome. I am really excited today to be with one of my favorite people. She is local with us here in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is an extra treat. Her name is Christina Sandwen, and she is a journey guide as well as many other things that you will learn about. She has quite a diverse background that she brings to her guideship. So, super excited to welcome her, ask many of the questions that we get from our microdosing community of her. And I think to open up, we'll just let her dive in. One question that people ask always is, the story, how the guides came to their own, came to their own medicine path and discovered and open to the fact that they wanted to do this work in the world. So Chrissy, I'll hand it over to you to say hi and kind of introduce yourself and your background.
Thanks so much, Casey. I'm just so thrilled to be here with you this morning. And yeah, that's a good place to start as any, right? Is like kind of how do you end up in this very niche, very unique role, right? And for me, it's kind of been a longer road. Like I feel like, I was introduced to psychedelics as a teenager and had some really amazing experiences, but like at the time I wasn't looking to them for healing in a deeper sense. It was more just like having fun with friends. That being said, when I was about 20, I had this experience with LSD where I like, sounds a little absurd, but I became a seagull. I was at the beach and I went and hung out with the seagulls. And there was this deeper sense that I got at that moment of like, there is something more here. Like I felt this sense of unity, like this sense of meaning. And I couldn't quite describe it at the time. Like, I was young, my friends were on the beach having a great time, and I'm sitting there like, huh, what is this experience? But it really sat with me in some way, even at the time, if I couldn't really like put words to it, just like, okay, huh. And I noticed after that, I'd chronically dealt with depression since childhood, really, that my depression was a lot less for months. And so just kind of like tracked that. And then, fast forward, I have this whole career in social work. That's what I did for most of my 20s. I was working in the US with immigrants and refugees, and then also internationally. And that work was, of course, super challenging, fulfilling in some ways, but just like, wow, like you're working with a lot of trauma, people who are caught in systems that often it's really hard to sort of like extract them out of, like it felt a little bit like I was moving pawns on this chessboard that I didn't design. And, it really wore me out. And so I kind of continually had been dealing with anxiety and depression. And at the time I was working in Costa Rica, when I really kind of had my first like big journey experience, it was with ayahuasca. I was desperate enough to try this thing that I'd never tried before. And yeah, I had this really huge experience. I mean, actually, it was 3 nights, and the first 2 nights I felt nothing. So, also want to normalize a lot of folks kind of beginning of their journey. It's sort of like, what is this? Like, I didn't feel like I was having the experience you're supposed to have or other people were having. And then I ended up having this just huge experience that really changed kind of the rest of my life. And things got worse before they got better for me. So I think that's also what pulled me more into the like exact type of work that I'm doing now is yeah, like that experience wasn't the magic pill for all of the underlying kind of like things that I was dealing with. Like there was a lot of repressed emotions, a lot of life experiences that I had to go back and really sit with. And so, I didn't have a lot of support and integration at the time. So I had a really rough go of it for about a year. It was like very intense. But within that time, I got super interested in integration. Like, how are other people dealing with these experiences? And yeah, just kind of started to go into that world and ended up coming into an underground guiding community. And sort of the rest is history. And it's been 2.5 years I've been doing this work full time. And what I can say, just kind of to sum up my own experience, is like, yeah, there is no kind of magic pill for like human suffering, right? Like I'm still a human. I still have my ups and downs, but I haven't dealt with depression and anxiety in years. And, I used to really think like I'm just a depressed person. Like this is just kind of who I am. And yeah, I can really say that this work in tandem with so much of the other work that I'll talk about too, um, has like completely changed who I am. And so that's also why I really got super interested in it, is it's like just so beautiful to be able to offer something that was so impactful for me, that I really believe has so much potential to heal. And yeah, I mean, I still feel really involved in community work and sort of the ethos of social work, but this started to feel like a way to really more deeply kind of change the world in a way, person by person. And yeah, and so I just feel really grateful to be able to talk about these experiences kind of more openly here, because of course, yeah, working more in the underground side, I don't always get to kind of most like publicly talk about my story, but I think it's really important because I really hope it lights a little way for other folks who are struggling to kind of see like, okay, there's a path, it's not just a one experience thing, but there's a path that can really lead to deep healing. And that's sort of what I see my role as, sort of lighting the way, and we can walk together.
I love it. So beautiful. I know so many people in our community are nodding their heads listening to you, listening to you right now. As far as the aspect, we just finished one of our 6-week immersions, and it was very eye-opening to them right off the bat that you fit how much more you start to feel. And it was this particular one, it was nature really put on a show of her range with this group, and it all, from anger to grief to frustration to all of these things. But then they see within through when those lift and then the release, that's where the healing happens. And a lot of them, yeah, were they saw in hindsight, they're like, gosh, this would be really difficult to do alone. Right. And so many guides say, I became a guide because I became the guide that I wish I would have had, to kind of help
Mhm.
me, walk me through this process, stand by me, and also help make sense of the process. So thank you for speaking to that so beautifully. I
Yeah.
would love to learn more about your background, because you have experience in, like you said, social work, psychotherapy, coaching. You've done a lot of diverse training. So I'd love to, which I love. I mean, once you're in the field, you really see like all of it. You bring all of it, and you can integrate the best of all of it. But I would love to speak to the different training you have, whether it's your underground training, to your coaching, to your therapy training, and really kind of being able to look back at that, and which components and elements do you draw from most, would you say?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And I think also really good for folks who are looking for a guide to like really ask these questions, because it's important. Like it's important that your guide has ongoing supervision and mentorship, and yeah, has done some trainings and knows about trauma and things like that, especially depending on your background. So yeah, anyway, I'm always really happy to kind of talk about where I'm coming from, because I think that's so important when you're learning about guides, is sort of like what's their training and what about their background do you resonate with, as long, along with just kind of the general vibe and energy that they have, like if you resonate with that, because that's so important too. So for me, yeah, I'd have my master's in social work. And so that was very much, a lot of just talking to folks. And so I had kind of a background in a little bit more of those principles of talk therapy, though I never did talk therapy. Um, of just kind of like, yeah, talking through what's going on for you. I did go on to get training in coaching, so that's a little bit more guided and a little bit more focused on the here and now, right? Of sort of like how we can kind of really meet the challenges that are here in an effective way and move forward. And so I really liked kind of, as I moved more into the coaching world, it started to feel a little bit like, okay, we can acknowledge and work on all of these parts in the past, but really focusing on how they're showing up in the present moment felt really impactful. But I think the biggest thread that I pull from and where kind of the breadth of my work now comes from is from somatics. And so the idea behind somatics is that basically the body is designed and really eager to heal. And, that can be, there's more of a top-down approach of mindfulness, yoga, things like that, but also more bottom-up approach, which would be things I'm training in somatic experiencing, which is one incredible modality to do that. Also breath work, things like that, that are really working with the nervous system directly to help us move out of fight, flight, freeze, and, these kind of common ways our nervous system can adapt to experiences in life. Like most of us have experienced a ton of stress that we haven't been able to process. And so for me, it feels like there's kind of this both of like coaching, the being able to talk about what's happening for us, and really working with the body. Like I find so many of my clients have done years of talk therapy, and what they're looking for and why they've come to psychedelics is something different. And I often feel like that missing piece with the psychedelic experience can also be somatics, because it helps us regulate our emotions better. It helps us really like tune into and kind of have awareness of our bodies. It helps us feel more grounded. So that feels like a really important part of my background. So I did a like 650 plus hour sexuality coaching certification, and that isn't necessarily my full focus, but from that really got a lot of work in somatics. And so now I'm doing somatic experiencing, finishing up a trauma release breathwork training as well. And so that feels like a really important part of my work, and my focus is like really bringing in that part about the body. Um, and the last thing I'll say in terms of kind of more like psychedelic guide training is, I was mentored by a friend initially and came to the Bay Area to be part of the consciousness medicine community, which some people may be familiar with. I was kind of in the outer layers of that community, and they've had some abuse scandals and have since kind of evaporated. And so more I could say on that, but I've found other medicine folks in the Bay Area who have trained me. I have two really skilled mentors who have, decades and decades of experience who supervise my work. Continue to sit and work with them and do my own psychedelic healing work. Because I think that's also really important, is to continue to connect with the medicine and try more and more to kind of be, just a more hollow bone for this work, to really work on my own stuff so it's not impacting so much my clients. That's kind of a little bit of like the broad strokes of some of the aspects that I'm bringing in.
Gorgeous. Gorgeous. Love it. My next question for you is a common one that we get. People in our community are coming into mushroom practice, but once they kind of get called and they become confident in themselves, very confident in relationship with the medicine, they get curious to do deeper work. And one of the common things is which medicine, you know, which medicine.
Absolutely.
And so they're familiar with mushrooms, of course, but there's so many different medicines. And so the question is, not only which guide and which space holder, but which medicine. So how do you, when you're meeting someone for the first time, kind of gauge, counsel, assist them on choosing which medicine, or maybe if it's, I know a lot of guides work with multiple medicines over time, how you calibrate how each person works with, a pathway.
Yeah, it's such a great question, because I also do general consults for folks. And oftentimes that's the main question, right? Is like, whoa, I had no idea. There's so many different options. And so for me, I only work with MDMA and psilocybin. Those are the medicines that I have the deepest relationship and deepest training with, though I also support people in integration who are doing other medicine experiences. But maybe I'll start with those two. Some part of it, I think, is a call, right? Like sometimes you just kind of feel like, okay, some interest, some resonance when you do your own research, you read, you hear about people's experiences. And I think as long as it's medically safe for you, there are contraindications depending, especially if you're on things like SSRIs, on kind of what medicine you might be able to safely partake in. But I always kind of honor that a little bit of like, okay, is your spidey sense tingling about one of them? Because I think that often is sort of like the answer. But particularly when folks come and they're like, I feel very open. Um, Generally, I suggest starting with MDMA if the idea is doing a one-on-one guided journey. That's because I have not encountered anything better than MDMA at really processing old traumatic memories and experiences. And I have seen over and over again how it can kind of create this really safe container to reprocess some of our traumas. Your window of tolerance, side of like your ability to process trauma is so big because your body's flooded with all these good chemicals. And it can just be really bonding, like as a guide, as a client. Generally, folks are feeling pretty open to connection, and that can really set the stage for doing deep work with psilocybin, which for me feels a little more predictable, like less predictable. That being said, I never like necessitate if someone's not feeling MDMA unless I'm really feeling like they maybe have too intensive a trauma history to really go straight to mushrooms. But yeah, it's always kind of my suggestion in terms of when people come to me specifically or are looking for more guided experiences. Um, with mushrooms, though, people are really interested in spiritual exploration, and their main reason that they're coming is some sense of wanting a connection to something bigger than us, wanting a little bit more of that sense of like meaning, like unity. These are themes that tend to be more common with mushrooms. Again, it depends on the dose, of course. But those are sort of like more the topics that I feel like mushrooms kind of can support with. Um, and I think those are both really great medicines to start out with, right? Like life is long, you have many opportunities if your first experience goes well to continue exploring, but those I always feel like can be really amazing opening experiences. And yeah, they're just medicines that are more easily accessible. You don't necessarily have to travel to get them, things like that. Of course, ayahuasca is its own incredible, beautiful path. And I think it's much more physically challenging. And so that can kind of like why I'm sort of like, oh, if you're a newbie, like mushrooms and MDMA feels a little bit less of like you're going to be barfing all night kind of. But again, I trust that call. And so also if someone's like, hey, I've read about ayahuasca. I mean, ayahuasca, I owe my life to ayahuasca. Like, of course, I'm not going to say like, don't go do it. And so I think really more than for me, it becomes about like how I can support someone to find the right container, the right person, and really using our discernment to look for medicine opportunities that are like safe and good. But I would say those are the three that are most common. Ketamine, of course, people can legally get ketamine or do ketamine journey work. Most places where that's available aren't emphasizing integration a lot. And so that's sort of my only hesitation there. But that's also one really great legal avenue if you can find providers that you trust who really are supportive around the experience. I also think ketamine is a really incredible option. LSD often people ask about and can be wonderful, but lasts 12 hours. And so likely if you're looking for a guided experience, there are guides who do that. But my recommendation would be to have two guides that are kind of, working to support you because 12 hours is a long time for someone to really hold down that space for you. So that's kind of like broad strokes, but I think really like, I think doing our own research and kind of again, like settling into some of like what feels good for us is probably the first step. And then of course, any reputable provider would be super happy to explain maybe more of the differences or what they might intuit would be good for you.
Beautiful. Thanks. I'd love to for you to share with us like a logistical question. Most of the people in our community, after, I'd say a few months up to a year, they start to get really confident, very connected with the medicine. Their practice becomes more intuitive.
Hmm.
That's when I know they're kind of in the new phase, is when
Yep.
they move out of this structured protocol that they have and a prescription that they take to an intuitive relationship. And that's just a sign to me that their relationship has deepened and they're ready for kind of threshold, and
Mhm.
initiatory experiences. So I'd love you to take us through when you have a client like that, say, who has been preparing, has been doing some personal work, some shadow work, some development work alongside microdosing, and then comes to you. What is kind of your process with them? Do you start with a higher dose? Do you start with a moderate dose? And kind of, do you have packages with integration that come
Yeah.
along with? Yeah.
Yeah. And I love those type. I mean, I love all clients, but that's always an exciting client to come your way. Cause yeah, I think so much, especially of what I observe with mushrooms, is it's relational work. It's like if people have some relationship already there with the mushrooms, there's just a different level that starts to open up. Um, And so even with people who are experienced, my minimum package is 4 prep sessions generally, unless, there's some real, like they have a lot of other support and maybe that would be financially just not possible. But generally, I like to have 4 prep and 4 integration as a minimum around the journey. And the reason for that is even if we're super in touch with the medicine, even if we've been preparing for a long time, over and over again. It's like safety is the environment that allows those pieces of us that have been fractured by trauma um, to come back. And so much of safety making is knowing your guide, like me getting to know your personal history. Generally I do sessions over Zoom, but normally if people live close, I like to do at least one session in person before the journey. And so it's sort of like that sense of like we're building the container from the time we already start to decide to work together. And I really have seen that can create the context for huge shifts, especially when someone already feels comfortable. Um, and certainly with those folks, if they know their dose, they feel comfortable. I feel comfortable starting them a little bit higher. But I also have noticed the longer that we work with the medicines, sometimes we actually don't need a higher dose to really go super deep. So I think it depends a little on the person and kind of the energetics that we're both feeling. Like I would want me as the practitioner holding the space to always feel comfortable with the dose. And I feel like I sort of have that veto or containing power. But I have sort of like, okay, I'm feeling within here feels good. And like, if you want to do the upper limit of that, like, I trust your discernment. Um, and, the other thing I would say that for people who've already done a lot of prep work, that feels important is, it depends on the guide. But for me, so much of it could be somatic work, breath work, or these other kind of modalities that you're bringing in and using before and after the experience that can really help deepen it. And oh my gosh, do I love taking mushrooms on my own. And my deepest experience have always been with a practitioner. And so I really do believe that there is something magical about working with someone, having them really there to care for you, um, and doing kind of like specific work before and after that, we know it's not just about the journey, it's a whole process that unfolds. And just being accountable to another person, I find is so part of the magic for me. So I always really like to offer that to people. It's like, it's not just the prep and the integration sessions. I'm always available, via email and text between if people need support, want to share their diary entries, whatever's going on for them. And that's just kind of a really magical thing to have in life, is someone who's really deeply there to support you. So that's also what I try and bring in with anyone, but especially experienced people. It's like, yeah, then I get to bring out some of my more advanced tools, and that's always really fun for me.
Awesome. I'm so excited to ask my next question, which is individual work versus group work.
Mhm.
So people ask this frequently, which one do I do? What is, kind of the pros and cons of each option? And also, I think it's very relevant right now as more and more and more people come to this work and become curious about this work. It's, it's, as you know, to do one-on-one work, it's a lot.
So
It's so expensive, but it's also on the part of the guide. It's very, very time intensive. And so part of, I think, what's exciting about the field right now is people are kind of developing new models and frameworks to hold people to guide, creating peer support programs, peer guiding programs. So given that you have done both, you have
mhm.
guided in a group setting and you've guided one-on-one, I would love to hear your perspective of what you have found the reality to be in working with groups versus one-on-one. And for new people, say for a lot of first timers, which we have in our community, is there one that you would strongly recommend over the other to start with?
Yeah, I love this question because yeah, I have worked with both. So I worked at a legal psilocybin retreat center in Jamaica and continue to kind of go there every now and again. And those are always doing groups. And then here I've done small groups and mostly one-on-one. Yeah, and I think of course it kind of goes back to okay, checking in with yourself, like intuitively, do you feel drawn to one? What I have experienced a lot over and over in terms of the group work is it can be more overwhelming. There's going to be more sounds, more people in their process, the potential for other people to impact your experience, and that can be incredibly beneficial and also challenging, right? Like so many of us, what we're working on is being vulnerable and part of others, connecting more deeply with other people, and groups can open up this like amazing portal to do that. And yeah, not everyone is like, I was just facilitating a group a few months ago where a woman was coughing the whole journey, and the guy next to her, his whole journey was about her cough. And I trust that that's what he needed and that's workable. And not everyone, some of us are more kind of sensory sensitive. And so if that is you for first experience, it may be beneficial to do a one-on-one experience if you can. Or what I offer, which can be really nice for folks, is if you say want to do a journey and so does a friend or so does a group of your friends, kind of creating a small group of people that you know and trust, that can be really impactful and amazing because you still get to connect, and it's less likely someone's going to be mega mega triggering to you. um though can't guarantee anything when we're talking about medicine work. um and so that would be my only caveat, is if you know you're someone who's like, you identify as a highly sensitive person, if you feel like, yeah, it would just be really helpful to have your own environment. One-on-one work is amazing because the guide should be tailoring everything to your needs, basically. I do think at some point, if folks are really interested in medicine work, it's great to have experiences with both. So if you start with a group doing some one-on-one work or vice versa, I think is really amazing. Um, but I wouldn't say there's one that I'm like, okay, you gotta do it this way. But I have, in my own experience, the one-on-one work seems to do something very different. It's much more about very deep processes for myself. And I've still gotten that hugely in groups, but it also feels like with groups, it's much more about understanding how I'm connected to other people, witnessing and feeling less separation with other people. And there's just something a little bit different. So I think both are so incredibly magical. But if you really need and desire really deep trauma work, I think that one-on-one is probably the best way to start with that.
Perfect. Yeah. Can you speak a little bit to weighing out, especially for someone's first time, the advantages of doing it in your home, an environment that you're very
Mhm.
familiar with, or are there advantages to doing it, say, in an environment that you've never been in, that you don't have a lot of attachments to, and indoor versus outdoor? We get asked a lot too.
I love this
So
question.
yeah, setting
Right? Because the
questions.
setting is so important. Like, not only is the mindset, what's happening in the world, all the prep work you've done, your history going in, but it's like, yeah, this where you're doing it is really important. Of course, the guide is kind of part of that. And, I always, again, ask folks kind of what they're feeling. Generally, the people I work with, the more we talk about it, realize my space would be where they want to do it. I design my space to be really fluffy. It's indoors. It's soundproof, but there's, windows, and it just feels very contained and safe and almost like this separate retreat away from their life. And that can be really helpful. But particularly if, yeah, a lot of what you want to work on is safety stuff, is like feeling safe, feeling comfortable. Like if you know you have some developmental trauma, um, it can be great to do it in your own home. It's like a space you already know. I always tell people, clean your house. The bills are not visible, like really making it into a sanctuary. But I think that can also be a really good option. And yeah, I do both. Not every guide does both, but I do work in people's homes. Sometimes people also, as kind of a third alternative, like to get an Airbnb somewhere really nice, make it their vacation, and all come out to their Airbnb. So it's sort of like a separate place for them, but they can stay overnight, make it sort of like this longer term kind of like taking time off from work or something. And that can also be great. Um, I would say the one experience I have had with someone doing it in their home that was challenging was like Amazon coming right to the door, things like that. So it's like you really want to make sure you have a space that feels separate, that's quiet, that feels really peaceful. Um, and I have also guided outside, and it can be wonderful. And I think having some connection to nature is amazing. But for the most part, the containment of inside, I think, can be really helpful if you're doing that deeper work. But I always like to, towards the end, go outside, have some time outside, connect with nature. That feels so important. But if clients feel very particular about going outside, as long as, weather permitting, there's a really safe, quiet spot. Um, I also feel great about that. But I would say generally what I do and what I've seen done is most of the time you're inside in a really safe, quiet place, you know, nice music, kind of you can control more of the factors there. And then as the medicine wears off, great to connect with nature, go sit outside. I have a balcony overlooking the bay. And sometimes, yeah, me and my clients have our best conversations there. But when you're deep in the medicine, it can be nice to have like a very cozy bed and a little bit like feelings of being contained, I think can be helpful.
Wonderful. My next question is going to make you smile. So I've asked this question of the others too, but this has literally come up with referring to you. So one of the things that we work with people to kind of overcome is, when you're choosing a guide, it's not necessarily choosing someone that's like you, or choosing someone
Yeah.
that's geographically near you or is the most convenient option. It's those things. And so I just to speak directly with referring to you, we've had some people in our community who, when they decided it was time for a journey, they were looking at different guides and they kept saying to me, I interviewed him, not the right one, not the right one, not the right one. And I realized they were choosing people who looked just like them.
Yeah.
They were an
Mhm.
older academic guy and they were just choosing older academic guys. And so frequently the guide and the healer that is destined for us does not look like us at
Yeah.
all, might
Mhm.
be much younger than we think they're going to be, or might be a different gender than we think are going to be. And so the more they deepen their relationship with the medicine, they really see that it's energetics, it's resonance, it's
Oh,
vibe. Holding space is a very non-mental,
yeah.
non-intellectual thing. It's a gift that you cultivate over time. And so we really try to encourage people when they're approaching their first journey and their first guide they will ever work with, kind of look beyond the framework of geography, and this is going to be a once in a lifetime experience, your first experience. You're going to remember this always, and so it's worth taking your time, exploring different geographic areas, kind of making it special and
Mhm.
reverential, because it is, it very much is. So from your perspective as a guide, what do you love, um, to hear? What kind of questions do you love to hear from potential clients in the process of, while they're looking for a guide? What things should they have top of mind? What should they be asking? What that should they be looking for? Um, yeah.
Yeah. I love this question too. And I actually have a whole sheet, like a write up that I sometimes give to people of like, here's what you should be asking your guides about. Because I think, first of all, one of the things you should look for is in a guide is someone who's not, yeah, who's willing to refer you out, who's also like willing, like really wants this to be a great experience for you. Um, but questions I really love, I mean, first of all, I want to just say the energetic thing is so important because really, that can sound kind of woo woo of like, oh, is it just a vibe? But that's really how we create safety with other people. And so much of this work is just like, can I trust this person? Do I feel like I could be vulnerable? Like perhaps the most vulnerable I've ever been in front of this person. And so much of that goes, yeah, so beyond age, gender, and so many of the ways in which we kind of organize in society normally. Um, and so I really love when people kind of like want to hear a little bit more about my experience, kind of feel like want to know me as a person, because I think that is important. Like, the way I operate does feel like I'm, yeah, another human in the room. Like, of course, I have a role. I'm there completely in service to the person I'm working for. And yeah, I'm a human. I'm not here to tell someone what to do or to kind of create some really big gap or hierarchy. So it feels really important that we kind of, yeah, that they're interested in knowing um, a little bit more about how I operate, kind of what type of space I want to create, and things like that. Um, and yeah, really curious, not just kind of like, oh, I'll do whatever, like someone who's really trying to feel if that's what they're looking for. I also think I really appreciate when people ask about training and experience because I think that shows a lot of discernment. Because these experiences can be so deep, and just knowing, yeah, like knowing how vulnerable we can be in these states, it's so important that we're checking in on that. And um I also always really love when people, to the extent, again, like you don't have to spew all of the things that have happened to you in the first kind of conversation, but when people feel ready to like be vulnerable and risk talking a little bit about what they're really deeply desiring in life, like I think that can be so challenging. But that really to me shows a readiness for this work of like, yeah, here's maybe the stuff that I don't really like to look at, or here's really the dream I've been dreaming that I'm afraid to tell other people about. And I think that can, yeah, that just to me feels really beautiful when people are at that point, because I feel like the medicine lives when we're just cracked open. Um, and I think also the last thing I wanted to say is just I think that thing about traveling, location, being a little more open, I've found to be true for myself in my own work too, that um yeah, the biggest experiences I've had have just been with the practitioners that I really just felt a click with. And I've worked with male guides, I've worked with guides that are significantly older. I worked with a guide that was younger than me as well. And yeah, I found something so beautiful in all of those experiences, and they met me exactly where I was at that moment. And I don't think it has to do with them and not necessarily like the surface of what we can see about them, but really, like you said, that quality of space holding. Um, so yeah, I work with a lot of older men, a lot of people across racial lines, all of that. I think again, you want to really check in what feels true for you, but I do think some openness can be nice when you're looking because you might be really surprised.
Right. Right. Well said. Um, this is a more experiential question of what you've seen real time. So I'm so curious. I'm so curious.
See the stuff.
Yes, the juicy stuff. So I would love to know based on like what you've seen, because I love part of the motivation, inspiration for doing the series is there's so much out there based on hypothesis and what we think might happen, or lab
Mhm.
based what's on in the research. And I think we're, you know, missing a lot by not hearing from the people who have been doing this work directly
Yeah.
on the ground, close to close to the earth for many many years sometimes. And so I love to ask, what are you actually seeing in people?
Yeah.
So my first question that I get asked a lot are, when people begin journeying and this becomes part of their life over the course of a lifetime, do the journeys thread together frequently in people? So people ask that a lot. Let's say if they're working on something and something
Mhm.
comes up in one journey, does it continue on in additional journeys?
You know what's interesting is, if you'd asked me maybe when I was first beginning, sometimes it feels like, okay, maybe they kind of don't, things can feel so different. And I overwhelmingly now I would say that they absolutely do, which is fascinating and not normally in such a linear way, right? Like I think the medicine can speak to us the way our unconscious speaks, these archetypal kind of symbolic ways. So it can take, I think that's why having a guide who's worked with you consistently can be really helpful, because I think from the outside, sometimes it's easier to see these themes. But over and over again, I've really seen that they do. And I've been rereading some of my old journey, like diaries from like years and years ago, and starting to see my own threads. And so it's not necessarily like so linear, like one leads to the other, leads to the other. But my assumption is, as humans, we all have some pretty like specific things we're working on in this life. And so I'm never surprised when it feels like there are common threads. And the intention you set in one journey really doesn't quite come to fruition until the fourth journey or something like that. Like that I've seen over and over again. Um, and so I think that's kind of the funny thing about this work is it's like I would be hesitant to say across the board that's everyone's experience because we are all so different. But I have seen that, and I've seen that a lot in unexpected ways of sort of like, okay, the medicine as you create that relationship, you might get a call back and more understanding of that first journey the more that you go on. Like, I don't think we're meant to have one kind of just big insight. It feels like it really is a path to me.
I love that so much. Spirit gives us a call back.
Exactly. Like, all right.
Okay.
So remember that really confusing thing? Like, here you go. I've definitely had that. And
So
yeah,
true.
again, that's why it's really nice to have like someone that you're working with consistently. But even if you're just working on your own, I always suggest to people, even if they're not big journalers, to write everything down after a journey, because I think that can be super helpful to be able to track those elements that we can just forget.
So true. So true. Another question people ask frequently. We have such a conscientious group. They're all smiling now. I can see
Oh,
them.
great.
How to best set yourself up for the best experience that you can have. Like, people want to proactively contribute to the experience, which
Mm-hmm.
I love, love, love.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what have you seen from all the people you've worked with that have been really, whether it's preparation or it's mindset or it's supporting practices, like what are the things that pop out in your mind most as, wow, they did this and this really enabled them to have a really beautiful experience?
Totally. And it's funny because again, yeah, I've had people who barely prepared and have a beautiful, it's like very not, again, not so linear. And what I can say is a few fold, certainly that I've noticed as maybe like trends. And I think hold these lightly. Like a lot of us are perfectionists and yeah, maybe the medicine is not, feeling like you need to be so perfect and ready. But enough space feels important. And I think that's really hard for a lot of my clients. People don't have a lot of time off of work. You've got kids, you've got responsibilities, and over again. And I've started to become much more strict about this. Like, you need to at least take a day or two off of work and have a weekend. And I've seen that there is just vastly more you can get because the medicine keeps working you for days, for weeks, maybe a lifetime. But especially if you have space in the days before and after to really sit and be with yourself, I think things just keep percolating. And the quicker you go back into sort of this like linear work mode, I think something can be lost. Again, for some people, it's not super realistic to have, you're not going to be able to be in the forest for a week and, whatever. But to the extent that we can, I think like creating that intention of space feels important. Um, and then I also feel like working with the intention, like one of the things that I tell folks I work with is to work with the intention almost as if you weren't going to do the medicine journey, right? Like, what would you do in your life if you really wanted to, work on your anxiety or really heal this relationship with your mom? Like, start doing those things now and have a plan for after of sort of like how you're going to ongoingly work on these topics. And that to me feels really like important is they've shown in brain imaging studies that even just the intention, of running really like lights up all these centers in your brain, focuses your attention. Like we're really amazing if we can set our mind to something. So in terms of mindset, I think that that's super important is sort of like, I'm not expecting I could go in and who knows what the medicine is going to do, but I'm already setting myself up to be working on this in a really deep way. Um, and I think lastly, in terms of mindset, it can sound like a Hallmark card. People hate it. We all know it, but it's like self-love is the absolute only way to make change. I am convinced over and over again. And that makes it sound easy. And it's absolutely, I think, the hardest thing we can do in a lifetime is to treat ourselves kindly a lot of the time. That can be so challenging. Um, and that's like something I really try and cultivate and challenge folks to do is to really hold those pieces of ourselves that we don't like they're the little children that they are, really. Like these are often pieces from childhood that we perpetuate our own trauma against ourselves continually. And really, what we're needing is like a grounding of kindness in our system so that our body, again, thinking in terms of somatics, like if we're feeling safe in our body, if we know how to resource ourselves, we know how to talk to ourselves, it's just so much easier for the body to release trauma and move on. Um, and so, of course, there's many ways that that can practically look like. There's a lot of practices I like to give folks, even just like sitting in meditation with themselves, creating mantras for themselves. We all have different ways of doing that. And that's not to say like you can't do medicine work if you're not feeling self-loving, of course. But I think that's one thing that we can try to cultivate the more that we do medicine work is a deep love and appreciation for who we are, even in our icky bits, which, yeah, again,
Beautiful.
take a lifetime, but I think it's a really beautiful intention.
Beautiful. That's a great lead into my next question, which is after the journey. There's a lot of emphasis on the journey itself for
Mm-hmm.
good reason, but the post journey is so potent, right? And people underestimate. We see this even in microdosing within the first few months is as you start to, yes, like come into yourself again, come into your intuition, love yourself, find new compassion for yourself. As you said, it's a very relational medicine. And so as you become more full inward, um, you start to lose all of this grip on these conditioning, our conditioned identity, our conditioned reality, our conditioned
Mm-hmm.
choices that we've made. And so after the journey, after the growth, the challenge becomes okay, the existing architecture of my life doesn't fit anymore. It's almost like walking into your house and suddenly it's not your house anymore. It's like, and then it's a process, right? To realize that it's you that has changed so deeply. In some ways, you're more yourself than
Yeah.
you have ever been, but a lot of your choices that you have made, sometimes it's your job that you're doing, the partner that you
Uh-huh.
chose, the life that you had created no longer kind of fits you. And so that's the potent, rich part of the medicine path, is that it's then, as you change inwardly, giving space and time and compassion to letting your external reality change, change.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't change as quickly sometimes. Ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
we can change in the blink of an eye sometimes. So that's a lot. That's kind of a big question. But in terms of supporting people in that process, or kind of speaking to people who might not be aware
Mm-hmm.
that this would be the case, um, yeah, just speaking to the integration and the importance of what are the important things to hold in your vision after you do the journey.
Yeah, it's like what comes to me as you say that is I think often people come to the medicine thinking it's sort of like um the end of a journey, or it's like all the answers will come, and a lot of the time it's actually, if we really are thinking of rites of passage, an initiation into this different way of being. And what comes after the initiation? Often the dark night. Like there is so much that needs to shift often, to your point, when we're really living from soul, living from this deep place. Yeah, we can often wake up and look around and think like, how did we get into this life? And that can't change overnight. And so I think often there's this liminal space that so much of us need to learn tolerance to be with uncertainty and not know what's happening. And it can be so challenging. But just to normalize that it happened to me, it's happened to me several cycles of this for sure, of like, there's often this space of unknowing where everything feels like, wow, I'm not sure where this is going. So much needs to change. Things are shifting so quickly. And that's like can be part of these experiences. So just to normalize that. And it doesn't last forever. And I think the main thing that I think of what feels so helpful, I host free events, and if people are in the Bay Area, but finding local community, like people who've gone through these experiences, integration groups. There's so many psychedelic societies out there, more and more, even on Reddit, online. I have clients who connect in so many different ways, and often for free with other people. And I think that is the medicine for this time. Like, I think one of my new favorite quotes is the new Buddha is a Sangha, right? Like the new Buddha is sort of a community. And as we wake up, I think we really need other people. So that kind of when I think of, oh my gosh, when we're in that in between, of course, hopefully you're still working with the provider you did the medicine experience with, or you have other people you're integrating with in a more deep way. But I think finding community, like-minded individuals can be so important. And the other facet I would mention, of course, there are so many, but is really that alone time space. For me, it's particularly in nature. And I think for a lot of people, that starts to open up more too, of like, when I think of how do we know? How do we know if this relationship is the right one? How do we know if we need to quit our job? And so often I find clients are like looking to me for that answer. And I haven't walked your path. Like, honestly, I can't quite know. But I find the more we do this work and our intuition opens up, if we can create that space and time with ourselves, we do know. And often it's like I have clients come in and they're like, I'm so confused. I don't know. And I'm like, okay, let's pause, tap into your heart for a moment and tell me, what do you know? And more often than not, we know. We just maybe don't want to know. It's difficult to know. And so, yeah, I think we need community, tailored support, and then also alone time. For me, if I take a 2-hour hike in Claremont Canyon here in the East Bay, the insights I get, yeah, are just, it's just, yeah, they need a space to come through, it feels like. So that's always what I encourage for folks too.
Love it. Thank you. So, my last question is quite broad, which is, our community is all laying the foundation, um, and is developing a strong nature connection in their process. But when you get people outside,
Mm-hmm.
who are coming to you, who have no background in
Mm-hmm.
medicine practice and sometimes no background in therapy or personal work. I ask this because increasingly within our community, um, people in their lives
Mm-hmm.
notice the shift and change in them, and they want that. They're like, I want that,
Always love when that happens.
but it's yeah, what is going on with you, and what do I need to do to get there? um which is inspiring, but at the same time, like, people in our community say it's a little bit frustrating because they've done a lot of work, and work
Right.
isn't even the right word.
Mm-hmm.
It's we don't quite have the right word. They have been very committed to their growth and development,
Yeah.
right? And so people in their lives who haven't done any kind of work are coming and then are inspired to do it, but they are not necessarily having the same experience
Right.
because of that other piece. And so as the field opens up and more people, it's in the mainstream press, and there's corporations getting into the field, when people come to you who have
Mm-hmm.
no background, what is your biggest advice for them? Because I know it'll be very, very meaningful with those in our community that are you, like having, Uncle Jim come to them and
Right. Who
as,
wants all of a sudden to do mushrooms
like
after? Yeah.
you, right, exactly.
Totally. Yeah. I've had, and when I think of the societal structures that we're living in now, I'm in the United States. There's this kind of like fast food culture, right? That I want that and I want it now. I want the healing. It should be immediate. And we all have that inside of us. So that's not to make it wrong at all. But of course, if we haven't had the opportunity to do a lot of self work, it's almost like, yeah, you just don't have a context for what you're opening up by doing medicine work, because it really is a path. I haven't, certainly people can have miraculous experiences with one journey. And more I see, to make it sustainable, there's either more journeys, other work, like a combo of a lot of things that really is supportive. So always what I kind of recommend to folks who come to me like that is first to slow down. Microdosing is a really good way for people to start kind of getting attuned to themselves, taking more time by themselves, things like that. Meditation, breath work is where I really love to start people, especially the breath work that I'm doing, which is more embodied trauma release. So again, working on these deeper layers of the body so that they, yeah, can be, a little more open and ready for the kind of changes and have more of that foundation before psychedelic work. Um, and so I think slowing them down is important, but not like dampening that flame. I think that this is great. We want the whole world to be like waking up to this. And I think getting a lot of support is helpful, because I think there are some folks who certainly can take bags of mushrooms on their own. They have amazing experiences and they have that. But for someone who hasn't done a lot of other work, I think it can be really re-traumatizing potentially. And so encouraging them to look for a guide who will move slowly with them, who will start with listening and really gaining a little bit of like trust, and maybe doing other work. Again, expanded states are not just psychedelics. We know meditation, we know breath work, we know even sexuality. These are other ways that people can kind of get the experience. And there's also a few books and resources that I tend to recommend for folks, and I'm always happy to pass on. I think consciousness medicine is a really good one for a lot of folks. Of course, we all know Michael Pollan's book. But for those folks, I think recommending some podcasts or just little things that they can read or gain more information, so it's not just like you being the fountain of it, can be really helpful. But I feel really encouraged kind of by this shift. A lot of the people I work with haven't done years and years of therapy. I think that is the ideal. And in some ways that's just not the reality for a lot of folks. And so I think as practitioners, it's also really important to know, we can modulate dose, we can really move slowly, we can do other things that I think can support people to have safe and effective journeys, even if they haven't done that deep work. So I imagine as this goes mainstream, that's going to be part of this, is like figuring out more and more how to tailor it depending on where people are in their journey. And that feels exciting. That's where we're going, that there'll be more access. That's really my biggest hope right now. Yeah.
Love it. Love it. With the time we have left, I'd love to open it up to for you to share anything that you would love to share, would love advice that you commonly give, and also how can people find you, both your practice online as well as if we have a lot of folks that are in the San Francisco Bay Area within our community. So if someone is interested in coming to your in-person events, as more and more of them happen, how might they find those too?
Yeah, we can start there. So I co-lead the East Bay Psychedelic Healing Collective. So folks can look for that. There's a Facebook group, there's an email list and website. And yeah, we do free meetups in a park. We've done dinners at my home around death and psychedelics. We've done events for practitioners and things like that, as well as integration circles. So would love anyone who's in the Bay Area. That's a great way to plug in and connect with other like-minded folks. It's been amazing. And my website's christinasandwen.com. And yeah, I'm always happy people can sign up for a free consult there. And even if I'm not the right fit, I'm a nerd about psychedelics. So I'm always happy to, yeah, support and refer out if that's necessary, things like that. So people can find, that's pretty easy to find on my website. It says Let's Connect at the top. But I would say I'm just really excited for the folks who are watching this. I mean, if you've already found Casey, you're doing something pretty right. And I just, I feel like such an optimist now. And it's really funny given my background of like having really horrible depression for years, working with people on like the fringes of society with almost nothing and feeling like, oh my gosh, like what are we doing? What can I do? Like, and I just time and time again, I feel more and more trust the more people I go through this process with. And so I just feel really grateful to be able to have this conversation with you, and grateful for the folks watching for the ways in which their healing is supporting my healing and the healing of all of us. Because I truly believe that something huge is happening. The more that we're learning about psychedelics and other modalities, again, I've seen amazing stuff with even breath work. I just feel like we're inviting in deep healings of our minds and bodies, and that just has to trickle out in a big way. And so anyway, I just to end on that of like, we're doing really great. I'm so proud of us. And I would be thrilled to support anyone on this journey. But more than anything, I just feel really excited about what the future holds. And yeah, like we're doing it. And it can be slow. It's not to like bypass again the process, but I think medicine work can be an incredible component to a life well lived, and just feel really honored to be able to offer it.
Love you so much. Thank you so, so much for your work and for being here and sharing with all of us. Just really appreciate and grateful for you. So
My
thank you,
deepest
Chrissy.
honor. Thanks so much, Casey.